Hi everyone, Steve here, and today I'm going to be talking about Howl. So this is the Allen Ginsberg famous poem, which was famously banned. There was a whole court case around the poem, and the whole film was sort of documenting this. Now, just one difference to this week's reading as opposed to other readings is for this week there is no actual physical reading, so there's nothing to actually read. Right. So what I'm really wanting to talk about is adaptation as performance and the way that different people perform different aspects of an adaptation. And the interesting thing about a poem is a lot of poems are written to be performed and to be performed in a particular way. And what Ginsberg did is he famously performed the poem, which has been recorded and archived. And what I'm wanting you to do is to listen to that recording, and which is on YouTube. I've got the link on Blackboard, but it's really interesting. So I'm not interested in you actually reading it, and the whole question is, poems actually meant to be read or meant to be performed? So I just want you to do that as opposed to reading it, and then we can sort of look at how the film basically tries to impersonate that performance that you'll be listening to. Right, so just sort of talking through Leach's modes. Well, what we've really got here is an analogy. These are sort of the inspired by or the based on adaptations. And we haven't really looked at these in the course so far. We haven't really looked at a true story one. But what we've got in Howl is very much a true story. So what you see is, like in this image here, you've got a lot of text, a lot of on-screen text. And that's basically just saying to you, this really happened, this really took place in these particular dates and these particular places. And it's constantly reaffirming that. So it's taking on a documentary style, and it takes on a documentary style for a number of reasons, because it wants you to kind of think it is a documentary. It also has to do with the filmmakers, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Now, the thing about the analogy is it goes further than the published work, right? So most adaptations, what they do is they get a particular text and they adapt that text, and they stick pretty much within the parameters of that text. Now, what the analogy does is it goes further. So it gives you a social and a cultural context to the text. So in this film, you're not just getting an adaptation of the poem Howl, you're getting the cultural and the social and also the legal context which the poem, basically the ways that the poem was received. So Howl is really the making of the poem Howl, but it's also the response to Howl, the political response to, the social response to it, the media response to it, also Ginsberg's own response to it. So there's a lot going on in this film. So it's more broader than your typical adaptation or other adaptations we've looked at so far. It really is interested in that cultural context, and also it's also interested in that historical context that we're kind of looking at in a film like this. Now, the film is kind of a celebration, and it doesn't really seem like a celebration, but what I mean by celebration, the reason I'm using this is because the whole film, everything that's said in the film, is composed from court records, interviews, and also Howl by Allen Ginsberg, right? So there's no dialogue that's actually been made up. Everything comes from a particular transcript or interview or something like that, or, the actual poem itself. And that's really interesting. Now, the reason I'm calling this celebration is because, firstly, nothing changes. But think of, say, Romeo plus Juliet, where Baz Luhrmann does a similar thing with the text, where he doesn't actually add anything. He just uses what was sort of from Shakespeare's play. And Howl does exactly the same thing. So if we're going to call it celebration for Romeo plus Juliet, I think we should also be calling it celebration in a film like Howl. But I do kind of appreciate, there is one difference, one being a complete work of fiction and the other being a complete work of fact. And the idea with this is its transcript or its script is really just coming from different sources, which again is kind of really interesting. The film is very much adjustment. So adjustment is it adjusts, changes, and alters the source without losing the sentiment. I mean, that's the whole thing of adjustment adaptation. And what you've got here in I think it was 1990. It could have been earlier. Allen Ginsberg and Eric Drucker, they did a book together, right? And what they did is they did this sort of, it's called Illuminated Poems. And Illuminated Poems was this book where what Drucker was doing was he was doing these really kind of wacko sort of poem illustrations which sort of accompanied Allen Ginsberg's words. And the whole thing again was, with Ginsberg, he doesn't want you to read his work. He wants it to see it performed. He wants to think of it as a performance. And that's what you've actually got in this book. So all of the animation that happens in the film, the animation happening with the creation of Howl and the performance of Howl, is really being inspired from this particular book. So it all seems like it's from the book. The only difference, of course, is in the book, they're still images, whereas in the film, we've actually got moving pictures through the actual animation. But it's very much kind of taking on sort of this different life through this illumination. With adjustment, I mean, the whole thing about adjustment is that it alters the source without losing the sentiment. So with Howl, right, you're seeing Howl performed in a way that you've never seen it performed before, but it's trying to stick to the true sentiment of that work and that text. So this is colonisation. So the colonisation being where the adapter puts their own unique style on the source. So Rob Epstein and Jeffrey Friedman. Now, these guys have made a couple of really fantastic documentaries, right? And they're really interested in kind of gay rights, social causes. So their two documentaries are The Times of Harvey Milk, which I highly recommend. I think it's a tremendous documentary. I'd actually say one of the great documentaries. And Celluloid Closet, which is also a really, really interesting documentary. Now, this film is, again, I mean, Allen Ginsberg was openly a gay man, which, is kind of interesting in the 50s to be an openly gay man and all that, the heat that kind of caused him. And one of the reasons for why the poem was actually banned was because it seemed to be so explicitly, sort of celebrating homosexuality, which a lot of people had a real issue with, certainly in the 1950s. And you can kind of see that played out in the film. So this film, it kind of works within their gay rights films, if that's what you want to call them, the other films that they've done and the particular themes that they're looking at in their other films. However, the result transforms into something different from the traditional documentary. So you don't get, this is not a documentary, this movie, obviously. Some people have called it a docudrama, and I suppose you could call it a docudrama being a bit of documentary, a bit of drama. But really, the finished film, it's a mixture of, it's a portrait of Allen Ginsberg. It's a biopic of Allen Ginsberg in a particular way, even though we're only looking at a very particular period of his life, like a year. But it's also a semi-documentary about the 1957. What is 1957? What's going on in America in 1957, which is going to cause such an outrage by so many people, which is sort of being played out in the film. And what these directors are really interested in doing is saying, okay, let's actually look at the time and the period that these people are from. So when he looks at Harvey Milk, who was a gay politician. So if you've seen the film Milk with Sean Penn, that's kind of based on this documentary. They're really interested in the social context for these films, and you kind of see that as well. So this film is very much part of their canon and really what they're interested in doing as filmmakers. Now, colonisation should also be considered when we're talking about James Franco in this movie, and James Franco, appears yet again. If anyone's part of my Facebook film adaptation page, you'll actually see a lot of posts to do with James Franco, because James Franco is very interested in adaptation in many, many different forms. He's also really interested in playing real-life people, which is kind of interested. And James Franco is heavily and hugely influenced by the Beat Generation. And it seems like there's no more appropriate person to play Ginsberg than James Franco. So when you're watching this film, you kind of need to think of it as a Franco film, and so that what we're talking about here is star as performer and also star as adapter, and or star as auteur, if you want to call them that. And James Franco, he's kind of doing similar things with his performance here that he's doing in a number of other films that he's appeared in and other films that he's directed. And if you look at all the films that James Franco has directed, they're all pretty much based on adaptations of popular, critical, American works, where the films or the works he's adapting are essaying and they're criticizing America and what America actually is, and they're criticizing the American dream. Um, and you just go on and look at all of the sorts of things that he's adapting, and also the sorts of characters that he's playing, and why he's so interested in that. So this is very much a James Franco film. So just a final thought. So this is the poster that you can see for the film. I mean, when the film came out, it received really mixed critical response. Some people really liked it and thought that it really got the poem really well. Other people didn't like it so much. They sort of felt it was a bit unfinished. The problem with the film, and the filmmakers would actually agree with this, and it was almost kind of the intent. So can you actually criticise if someone's intent to do what they've actually done? It's not really a biopic. It's not really a documentary, and it's only loosely an adaptation. So the question therefore becomes, how do you define this film? How do you make sense of the film? And the question I'm putting to you is, how would you market this film? Is the film a success? How does it make you? Does it make you want to go and read Howl after looking at this film? So this is the poster that they came up with. So it says, the tagline is "The beat that rocked a generation." And you've got Allen Ginsberg, or James Franco, sitting there typing away his famous poem. It says on the side, one of the quotes, "James Franco is Oscar worthy." Well, I'll let you be the judge of that one. And then it says down the bottom, James Franco is Allen Ginsberg. So just the question I'm leaving you with is this a true reflection of the movie that you are about to see or you have seen? Does this actually reflect what the film is about? It's called Howl, but it doesn't actually give you much evidence that this film is actually about the writing and the making of the poem Howl, but also the making of the Howl myth and all the myth that actually surrounds this poem now. So let's leave it there. I think there's a few things that we can take from this discussion into the screening. I think it's a really interesting adaptation, and it's a very ambitious adaptation. And just think about that. Also think about how the film is trying to perform this poem and what it's actually trying to do as performance as adaptation. And that's really what I want to concentrate with the viewing and discussion around Howl. Okay, I hope you enjoy it. And also, I should just warn you, the poem that Ginsberg performs that you'll listen to, it's completely bonkers and it's completely nuts, but it's kind of compelling, and it's a really it's really fantastic because when you're actually thinking of performance and adaptation, things like that. And Allen Ginsberg, of course, is one of the seminal figures in American and sort of Western culture and writing, and he still seems to rile and piss off people today, which is only a good thing. All right, I'll leave it there, and I will see you in the screening.